I get the pleasure of introducing Jodi. So Jodi is the President and Chief Scientist of Y2Y, specializing in ecological corridor and large landscape research. She has more than 25 years of experience managing large landscape conservation efforts. This work focuses on applying best available information to address complex challenges through community-based collaborative efforts, and also centers Indigenous leadership in conservation. Author and editor of 4 books, she has also led the writing of the 2020 IUCN Guidelines for Conserving Connectivity as the Deputy Chair of the IUCN Connectivity Conservation Specialist Group. And with that, welcome Jodi Hilty. Thank you.
Getting me all ready here. I feel so lucky to be here today. We've got these wooden tags that keep us from polluting more microplastics. We've got this incredible back view with the trees dancing behind me. It just feels good. And you all, you might not know this, but you are part of my solution. About a year and a half ago, I was down in Colombia, and I had the good fortune of working with a group called, what are they called? Oh, I don't know, but they were a large corridor group. And they wanted some input from Yellowstone to Yukon, which I'll talk to you about today. But I met an elder, and he said, I want you to put this bracelet on. It's an anaconda bracelet. So they put it on, and then it shrinks, and you can't get it off until your wish comes true. And all I can say, I can't tell you my wish, but I can say that this and the work that you're doing is part of the answer to me getting my bracelet off. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about another corridor movement. And what I want to emphasize here is that, so the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative is a well-known and one of the older conservation, large-scale movements. But success is actually about getting conservation done at scale all over the world. That's what true success looks like. So let's get going. Why do we need large-scale conservation? It turns out that research tells us that as protected areas like Nairobi National Park are increasingly surrounded by humanity, we start to lose animals from those smaller protected areas. And in fact, research shows that the larger the human footprint, the larger the activity around wildlife, the less likely they are to be able to move or migrate, and their migrations shrink in size. And so we really have to pay attention to this, whether it's amphibians like salamanders or whether it's great migrations like in Eastern Africa. So when I started my career, I graduated as an undergraduate in 1993, which I think was like yesterday. And right around that time, we started to get satellite collars, and the precursor to GPS collars. And so we put one on Pluie the wolf, and Pluie was just south of Banff National Park, and she took 100,000 square kilometer jaunt across 2 countries, 2 provinces, 3 states, 3 national parks, a bunch of provincial parks, private lands, and other jurisdictions, 30 in total. It blew the minds of everybody. What she showed us was that the last century approach to protected areas was important, but insufficient for animals like her. She was legally killed with her pups just south of Kootenay National Park. And so it was in 1993 that a group of conservationists and scientists from Canada and the US got together. One of them is sitting right here, Jeremy Guth. If you want to learn more about Y2Y, do ask him. And they created this vision. This is the scale that they thought we would need to do conservation to save animals like Pluie the wolf. It is 3 times the size of California and stretches from south of Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park all the way to the Yukon to the Arctic Circle. And they created this vision of connecting and protecting this landscape so that both people and nature can thrive. And they did this using the best available information. So Pluie the wolf, also maps like this. So the map on the right shows how large carnivores and hooved animals like elk used to be distributed all across North America. And then fast forwarding to today, where you see that they're really relegated into the Y2Y region. So how do we keep those animals there in the long term? And we can look at just single individual animals like grizzly bears. How many of you knew that grizzly bears used to roam in Mexico? Okay, well, then by the 1920s, those little brown dots in the United States, those are all animals that there were small populations, and eventually someone killed an animal or there wasn't a breeding age female or male, and they all went extinct, except for the Yellowstone population. And that's hanging on. It's less genetically diverse than the grizzly bears coming out of Canada. So we have to reconnect them, and we're working on it. They used to be 150 miles apart. Now they're about 40 miles apart. But I'm getting ahead of my story. So the other thing that the co-founders realized at the time instinctively, and now has been proven with science, as often is the case, is that the Yellowstone to Yukon region is actually a climate answer. Okay, first of all, it's a north-south mountain range. So animals can move north as climate changes, but they can also move up in elevation and to different slopes and aspects. Second, the work of so many people and the conservation to create bigger protected areas, to connect them, and to reduce stressors is what scientists recommend needs to be done across that landscape so that nature can continue to thrive while climate is changing. And third, it's about carbon storage. So we have a scientist at Y2Y that's working on this right now, and he just came out with a new draft, and I'm really pleased to be able to share this with you. This is so cool. So if you look at cars, 85% of the passenger vehicles in Canada and how much pollution and carbon they release into the atmosphere on an average year, Y2Y captures that carbon. It sucks it out of the atmosphere and it holds it in the Y2Y region. That is doing carbon mitigation at scale. And you all, as you look to restore and protect nature here in the escarpment, are doing the same thing. So important for today. So when I started at Yellowstone to Yukon 10 years ago as the president and chief scientist, people said, it's such a cool idea. Some people early on had called it the wingnut idea, to be clear. And they said, but has anything happened? So being a pointy-headed scientist, we went to figure this out. And in fact, protected areas have increased from the beginning of 1993 to now by more than 80%, and that's double the rate of the rest of North America. So having a vision like you all have for this region makes a difference. Secondly, at the 25-year mark, we had 117 wildlife crossing structures for frogs, for all sorts of small amphibians, to large carnivores, right? And today it's 177. We are getting to normalization of safe wildlife passage for wildlife. And third, we've seen some critters, like grizzly bears in the US, expand and recover. Okay, so the Y2Y vision is making a difference. Having a vision makes a difference. And that gets to the how for the Y2Y region. So let's talk about how do we achieve a vision that's 3 times the size of California? What does that look like? Okay, so the first thing is making the case that nature is the best use. Bruce really did that well this morning for this region. Nature is important. The second ingredient is actually about having the best available information. It might be indigenous knowledge, it might be Western science, it might be braiding them together as we did in this Canadian mountain assessment. It's about bringing that information that tells us where the problems are, and most importantly, what are the solutions? How can we get to solutions together? And the third thing, and again, Bruce kind of opened this up, it's about a huge community. So the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative has now collaborated with over 800 different entities, businesses, governments, indigenous nations, nonprofits, scientists, you name it. It is about finding common ground and working together, especially with local communities, and you're all from here, right? In the long term, who maintains those protected areas and makes sure that they stay protected? It is local communities. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about where Y2Y is and what we're looking to achieve, and I think it is going to be very familiar to you. So we have 3 pillars: protect, connect, and communities. So first, let's talk about protect. The world, including Canada, has committed to getting to 30% protected areas by 2030. Okay, for us, that means that we have to add another 50 million acres of protected areas. That's a lot. Banff is 1.7 million acres. So what the heck? How are we going to get there? Well, I'll remind you, okay, so, between 1993 and today, we increased protected areas by more than 80%. And what's really cool about some of those protections is that we are now, we now see that the region is at least 25%, or the protected areas are at least 25% managed or co-managed by Indigenous peoples. That's really cool. Okay, but before I tell you where we're going, I'm going to give you a little bit of a story and a warning. Protected areas we often think of as permanent. If anybody's looking south over that other border into that other country, you might kind of realize how impermanent things can be. And I want to tell you this story about Y2Y. First, how many of you knew that Banff National Park shrunk in size historically? Nobody? Okay, we got 1. 2. Okay, this is an important story. When the federal government devolved the authority of public land management to provinces, Alberta said, ooh, too much federal authority, and they shrunk it. And then we had, as conservationists and community members, we actually had to work on creating Kananaskis Country, Bow Valley Wildlands, and other areas to restore what actually needed to be protected in that area. The second example is the Mackenzie Mountain Game Reserve up in the far north there. And it was this huge place, and then they discovered gold. And so what are we doing right now? We are working on restoring what was a protected area. And third, I have to give this example of Hamber National Park. How many of you wondered, I don't know if you follow this in the East, but caribou went extinct in Banff National Park, a pristine area. And then all of a sudden they're endangered in Jasper. How could that be? You put your head on it, you think about it, and you think, that's not right. What's going on? Well, actually, they were part of what we scientists call a metapopulation, or a population of populations. And what I mean by that is that they were never a proper population that could survive by itself. They needed to be connected to other subpopulations. Well, on the western side of Banff and Jasper, it was a park called Hamber National Park. Provincial park, sorry. And they reduced it by 95%. They gave it a really bad haircut, aka they logged it. And then they put in a reservoir. Okay, well, it turns out caribou can walk across ice, but they don't like to walk across reservoir ice because it sounds hollow, like they're going to fall through. And so suddenly there's no connectivity for caribou anymore, and that's those small kind of satellite populations ultimately went extinct or are struggling to stay present. So I say this because you all are creating a movement to forever move forward and protect a region, and it means you have to stay vigilant. Okay, so that warning aside, let's get back to the story of protected areas in the Y2Y region. How are we going to increase them by 50 million? Well, okay, so we said we'd increase protected areas by 80%, so we're 59 million acres in. We have another 14.4 million acres that are agreed upon by indigenous governments, the regional government, and federal governments. Those are still getting designated across the landscape. And then we have 20 indigenous visions for new protected areas, those polygons, across the Y2Y region that will far get us beyond 30 by 30. That is a beautiful vision. And we are busy as an organization supporting those indigenous visions to advance forward. So you could look at, for example, right, but the yellow and gray overlapping blobs in the far north, that is already announced as a feasibility study for a national park with the Ross River First Nation. And that project is well advanced. It's really cool. I want to tell you about one area. This is in the narrowest part of the Y2Y region. And there was a park, and I can't really use my pointer, but it's called Clinsazon. It's kind of on the right. It's a bright green color. And what they did was they expanded that park because of the West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nation vision to 75 times bigger than it originally was. Plus, they put another 1 million acres off limits to natural resource extraction, only to be opened if the nations and the BC government agree to change those, which the nations have no intent of ever doing. So that is to say, we are making concrete strides forward. It's exciting. Okay, so we talked about protect. Let's get to connect. So the next issue is that we still have, especially in the southern part of the Y2Y region, an increasingly disconnected landscape with more and more human activity. And we have to connect them, such as with these kinds of bridges. Well, the good news is, and I told you, that there are at least 177 wildlife crossing structures and associated fencing that get wildlife safely across busy roads. And I think this really makes the case for it. This is Lingen-Poulter the bear, and these two squiggly lines, the green and the yellow, are movements in two different time periods. But the important thing to look at is the little X's on Interstate 90 in Montana. There are 44 of those X's. That bear came and approached the road and bounced off. Came and approached the road and bounced off. He could not get across that road until on the very far left, you notice that he went across. This is a poster for why we need wildlife crossing structures, and I'm happy to announce that today the Montana Department of Transportation is moving forward with a study to figure out where wildlife crossing structures need to be on that highway. One of the things people always ask is, do they really work? And I love this particular slide because it shows that at the beginning of the Banff crossing structures, of which there are 44 crossing structures, the bears didn't use them. Very low use. But over the years, they figured out how to use them. So some bears have breakfast on one side, lunch on the other. Some bears use them to disperse, but they all use them. And the cool thing is that study, which is arguably the region, Banff crossing structures are probably the most well-studied set of crossing structures in the world. They've inspired crossing structures in India, China, all over the world. But the cool thing about it is that they discovered that some species, like mountain lions, don't like the overpasses. They want to be undercover, so they're using the underpasses. And with other animals, you get differences in sexes. So male grizzly bears, they own the world. They don't care. They'll use anything. But if you're a female and you're trying to protect your cubs, you're probably going to use an overpass, right? You don't want to be jumped on, and so you're going to take your cubs across an overpass. The other thing is that for animals like this, ooh, is she going to get hit? The other thing is that it reduces hooved animal collisions by 96%. That keeps all of us as drivers safe, and it keeps those elk and other critters safe. So Banff National Park is sort of special because you're connecting a park to a park. But in a lot of those places where there are roads, we also need, just like you all here, to deal with the private lands. And so we work with 27 land trusts on voluntary private land conservation. It might be buying the lands, it might be easements, it might be working with landowners to ensure that wildlife can get across. So let me tell you a little bit of a story right on the US-Canada border there. You can really see how wildlife are beginning to fragment. So what you're looking at is a study of the genetics of grizzly bears. They were once, you couldn't distinguish the genetics of grizzly bears. Today, those little yellow circles indicate genetically identifiable subpopulations. And if you were to follow those little dotted lines, like you can look at Highway 3 just above the US border, a lot of those dotted yellow lines follow, not surprisingly, roads and the development that happens along roads. So what have we done about that? Well, we started a collaborative project with 100 different partners right in that border area. And I'll tell you that that border area is so important. The US listed wolverines, okay, secretly, don't tell anyone, but my favorite animal. They said, if wolverines get disconnected from their Canadian population, they will go extinct in the lower 48 states. There's not even enough room for more than 300 individuals in the US. So that's not a viable population. The viable population is the Yellowstone to Yukon population. And they said, one of the biggest barriers for wolverines, roads. So what are we doing about it? So we worked together over a 15-year period, and we worked to reconnect those Kid Creek Bees to Bears project, Wild River Estates. We bought land, we worked with landowners, and fortunately, the grizzly bear biologists had collared these bears, and so we actually know that bears are moving across all of those reconnected areas today. That is super exciting. But we still have roads. So the good news is that BC started off committing to 9 wildlife crossing structures, including an overpass that you can kind of see as an orange dot in that inset. And they're moving forward on it. Christine Drake, who's here from Parks Canada Ecological Corridors Program, became a major partner, really pushing that forward with supportive funding, again, of a huge collaborative that was working on this project. Well, the Alberta wildlife biologists went over, and there had been studies on the Alberta side, and suddenly they announced a whole lot of wildlife crossing structures on the Alberta side. And in fact, I was just driving that highway recently, and right where the 3 roads kind of intersect on the far left, that underpass and the 2 Rs, which are retrofits, are completed. They're working on the fencing right now, and they've let 2 designs out for overpasses in that region. They're moving forward in big ways to ensure that wolverines and lots of other wildlife can continue to use this area. Okay, so we've got protect, we've got connect. What's the third ingredient? It's about communities. That's you all. We need to have nature-positive communities. And for us, primarily, and we're dealing with a lot of toothy critters out west, as well as big animals. We've got to have coexistence. How many of you have been to Yellowstone National Park and sat by, Old Faithful? You can actually see this play out almost every day. I can't stand it. I'll sit there for a little bit and watch people approach the bison. It charges them, and then they go back and do it again. Anyway, so for us, it's about coexistence, and there's a couple of different kinds of coexistence. There's the rural coexistence. So ranchers need to find a livelihood. We're asking them to live with these toothy critters. So providing the kinds of tools, whether it's electrified fencing around their calving areas, whether it's range riders like this gal on a horse, keeping the bears and the cattle separate, these are all really important tools that need to move forward and are moving forward across the Y2Y region. Could be backcountry. It might be hikers, bikers, snowmobilers, skiers, right? We have to find a way to make sure that that backcountry recreation is well managed. Turns out a recent study that we did shows that 25% of the trails in our two study areas in BC and Alberta aren't on any manager's maps. Why is that a problem? Well, if they don't know that people are using those trails, they're not managing them. So managing recreation is super important, and that includes at the very beginning, where do the trails need to go to make sure that we're not disrupting endangered species or dislocating species from critical habitat. We're all for recreation. We want to get people outdoors, and we want it to be in a way that's in harmony with nature. And the third is keeping wildlife out of urban areas. That's what coexistence is. Nobody wants to wake up sharing a bed with a grizzly bear. So how do we do that? We manage our trash, we manage our trees, our chicken coops, all of that stuff. And the important thing with coexistence is actually scaling it up. So we have a lot of really cool places that are doing things right in the urban backcountry and rural environment. And now we need to push it to scale, and that takes government collaboration and all hands on deck approach. Okay, so I've given you the three approaches that Y2Y takes to getting to large-scale conservation. I want to just pause for a moment and tell you my why. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think about what would it be like if you were stuck in a bottle and that was your only opportunity to relate with nature? Or if you were to see a chimpanzee in a bottle, is that how we want to see them? No. Open your eyes. This is what I want for my daughters. I want them to be on wild and free rivers. This is the three of us going down the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon, and I'm looking very serious because I was a little concerned. And I am concerned. You know what? The next generation is going through incredibly turbid waters, and the work that I'm doing, the work that you all are doing, is critically important to set up that next generation so that the Earth's ecosystem is functioning and intact, and so that they can roam free along with the wildlife. So thank you for joining me in caring about corridor conservation and nature conservation today. Do we have time for questions? Oh, we do. Okay. So, shoot away. And you speak really loud. I'll repeat your question.
Okay. I was just wondering, when you were talking about Alberta with ranchers and private lands, I'm just wondering what sort of a reception you normally get. Because when I think of ranching in Alberta, I don't necessarily over here in Ontario think you're going to get a very cooperative group of people. So I'm just wondering what your experience is with that.
All right. We got bias against Alberta. I don't know why. So the question was, how is the reception for private land conservation from ranching communities? And it turns out it's actually really good. It is definitely varied person by people because, we people, we're individuals. I'm really happy to tell you that the Nature Conservancy Canada has done an incredible job, for example, working with the private ranching community around the Waterton National Park. They've actually created this huge buffer around it. And many of the other land trusts in the region have had success because ranchers love their land. Often they're land rich and cash poor. And so their challenge is that the next generation doesn't necessarily want to ranch, and they don't want to have to subdivide. So something like an easement where they're getting that cash so they can retire and they get to keep their land intact really matters for them. Secondly, we're in a situation really across that southern part of the Y2Y region where grizzly bears and wolves and mountain lions and even wolverines have recovered. There is no lived memory in the ranching community's minds of having to do ranching with large carnivores. When ranching came to that region, they were pretty much all wiped out, and they've recovered. And so I would argue it is society's job to help provide the resources for them to continue to survive. And it's a win-win because it keeps those ranches open. They care about the natural lands, and they just need to be able to make a living. And so it's our job to work with them to do it together, and they're really open to receiving those tools. Next question.
Thank you. A follow-up question. In Ontario, I read that 75% of all species at risk have co-evolved with indigenous, they call it farming land management. They farmed the wild. And then the settlers came in and integrated those mixed farms. And now we have barn swallows and barn owls and field sparrows and bobolinks and meadowlarks and a long, long, long list of animals who evolved in human systems. Could you just talk about the role of agricultural land as corridors? Because sometimes I feel we're focusing so much on the protected islands that we forget about the agricultural lands that lie in between. Could you maybe comment?
Yeah.
You started that.
Yeah, there's sort of two different statements, questions in there. One is, the role of Indigenous people and that they've played for thousands of years in really managing lands and nature. And secondly, the role of agricultural lands, sort of interrelated with the last comment, in connectivity. And absolutely, so, whether it's here or whether it's in the Y2Y region, working landscapes are critically important to maintaining and even restoring connectivity, whether that's hedgerows or riparian areas that are managed in a natural way in agricultural landscapes. They can be really critical for wildlife. I think the other point you're making is that Indigenous peoples have a lot of knowledge and have had practices that really matter. So in the Bow Valley, we are freaked out about fire. Jasper, a third of the town burned down. I keep telling my husband, enjoy our house, it might not be here. Turns out Indigenous people used to winter in that valley, and they regularly burned that valley. So I hear stories of how the river used to run yellow because it was aspen trees and cottonwoods, and today it's sort of senesced conifer forests. And so the land managers in the valley are working really hard as the forests continue to dry out with this climate change to begin to change that. And it's a real struggle to do that at scale, especially when we now have permanent establishments. The Arhe Nakota, who are one of the folks who, nations that used that valley consistently over the years, are beginning to work with Parks Canada on restoring Indigenous burns. And I think it will be hard to get there fast, so we'll see which comes first, the major catastrophic fire or restoration, but hopefully it's the latter from a selfish perspective. Let's see, I had a question here, then there, then there, then there. Yeah.
What impact has the current administration had on your Y2Y efforts? And then on top of that, what can we do in anticipation of a potential regime change here that might start to counter the efforts we have with conservation and corridor management?
I think you asked what impacts has the U.S. administration had, and what will this new administration in Canada mean for the Y2Y region? So in the U.S., well, we don't know what impacts there have been because there's a decision made and then it's rescinded and then it goes to court and then it comes out of court and then it goes back into court. So right now, nothing. And in our work, candidly, we work primarily with states. And in the states that we work in, they are gun-ho about, Montana has some of the highest roadkill rates. 70% of Montanans, and I originally am from Montana, so I'm fortunately in this statistic, have hit large mammals. It is a terrible experience. They are gun-ho about fixing that problem. They are gun-ho about fixing coexistence problems, and it was the elected officials in Montana who stood up and said, don't sell our public lands. So we're in a pretty good position on the U.S. side-ish. There's some decisions that are being made. There's not a lot of land managers left out there on federal lands right now. So that's a longer-term issue, and the science that we use to guide our work is no longer happening out of federal agencies. So there's a longer-term issue there. On the Canadian side, we're kind of waiting to see where things are going. Based on what we've seen so far and some of the information coming out, I'm very hopeful that conservation will continue to move forward, really kind of braided in there with climate change. And I think that's how this administration is seeing this, and I think this is super important for us. It used to be that climate change was over here and conservation was over here, and now we're sort of realizing it's the same side, or different sides of the same coin. So I'm hopeful, but we'll see what comes out of the mandates. Back there, who was that? Somebody back there had their hand up.
Thank you very much. In this particular area, I represent an organization that is very desirous of the broader coalition of groups and the Ecological Corridor Alliance to really integrate and embrace watersheds as well as the terrestrial connections and the corridor concept. I think your area has got some huge rivers in it.
13 of them.
I didn't hear, yeah, the big ones. And I take it the outline is based on kind of land. But can you tell me, you mentioned roads and other negative impacts. Can you tell us a little bit about your perception of integrating water to the Y2K corridor?
Yes, so there are 3 hydrological apexes in the Y2Y region. What that means is, for example, just in Banff National Park, there's a mountain called Snow Mountain if you're going up to the Columbia ice fields. And that water on that mountain can drain into 3 places: the Arctic, the Pacific, or the Atlantic through Hudson Bay. That, and so I think from the perspective, I didn't get a chance to talk about it today, so I'm glad you asked. That region is disproportionately important for the headwaters protection for so much of North America. And so whether it's the protected areas or the corridors, which are often riparian corridors or river corridors, protecting those riverine ways is critical, not just in the Y2Y region, but really for all those millions of people downstream. Yeah, thank you for asking that. You had a question, and then we'll get to you. Thanks.
My question is, I think you're doing great work there in the northwest. How are you doing
Biosphere Reserve?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. The very first UNESCO Biosphere Reserve is in the Waterton Glacier National Park area. And actually, it's one of the first international peace parks as well. And what's so cool about that, and one of the first things I learned when I got to go to a meeting in that region with the Rotary Club, who really supports that work, was the difference between negative peace and positive peace. Anyone want to take a shot at that? All right. Positive peace is when across boundaries, two entities are working together, which is what Glacier and Waterton National Park are doing across the international border. Negative peace is the absence of collaboration. And so, we feel in the Y2Y region that being a transboundary group is so critical, and the Biosphere Reserve Program is a really important part of making that happen right there. So that's an example of some of the work that we're doing with that group. Thank you, because that's a critical group, and around the world, that program helps support national parks and larger living landscapes to continue to promote nature conservation as well as thriving human communities. Yeah.
So what sort of positive role do you see for the hunting and fishing community to add to what you're doing?
So the hunting and fishing community, he's going to cut me off after this. Oh, you're good? Okay. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Yeah, I forgot. So he asked, what role does the hunting and fishing community play? They are critical partners for us. So, when we look at how many wildlife are being killed on roads, it's the hunting community that stands up and says, we don't want this. We want to see healthy populations that we can continue to sustainably harvest and feed our families. When we're looking at watershed work, like there's an area between Jasper National Park and Banff National Park called the Bighorn. And it's this immense watershed. It's super important. Great fishing. Bull trout, endangered cutthroat trout in that region. People go there all the time. And it's underprotected, and we now have, and it's very poorly managed, so there are a lot of off-road vehicle informal trails just going across spawning areas for those fish, and it is the fishing community that is the loudest community for better management of that landscape. So they are absolutely a huge part of the conservation community. In British Columbia, we have something called the BC Wildlife Coalition that one of my colleagues and others have put together, and it's outfitters, the fishermen, the hunters, and the conservation community. They don't agree on everything, but they agree on a lot, and that's where they have a really powerful voice to the BC government representing all of their constituency on nature conservation. One more question.
Very small question about a very small critter. And it's the June fly. I lived there for 40 years, and it used to be, I drive with my car in June, my windshield would be splashed.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I see very few. Research involved in the smaller creatures, and why is it?
So he was saying that in this area, in June, his windshield used to be covered with insects, primarily the June fly, and today it's not. I was in Austria recently, and there was an American there, and we were commenting on the absence of sound, of nature sounds, and that something's critically wrong in the world. The insect populations are in massive decline. Is that the neonicotinoids that were invented a while back? Is it just the overwhelming presence of humans and all of the chemicals that we've introduced into the environment? There's a lot of research on that. I don't know exactly why the June bug has declined, but it is clear that insects are doing better where there's larger natural areas. So again, an impetus to create those larger natural areas. But you ask a really critical question. Why are these things changing? Thank you for that. Uh-oh, there's somebody waving and wants to answer that question, I think. Did we get one last question, or are we done?
I think we are, if there wasn't one there, I think we're good, Jodi.
Okay, thank you so much.